Yes, hi everybody. I'm Steve Simpson, the Academic Director of the Charles Perkins Centre, and I'd like to welcome you all to the second in our new series, CPC Talks. I had the great pleasure to deliver the first. So today we have the Wearables in Research and Public Health, Current and Future Potential talk. Before I begin, I would like, as always, to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the lands upon which we're meeting, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, elders past, present, emerging, and any First Nations people with us today. I pay my respects and welcome. Today, we have kind of a joint celebration, really. We're going to hear the talks and you'll participate in the discussion. But we have the opportunity also to launch the Wearables Hub, sadly delayed thanks to a chestnut skin, but that's a different story from a couple of weeks back. And the Wearables Hub it's terribly apt that we're in the room where it's now called the Jennie Mackenzie room, and where we hang the picture of Jennie. Jennie, a great champion for early and mid-career researchers here at the Charles Perkins Centre, and an incredibly generous donor to us upon her death at the end of 2022. And that's enabled us to spend some money to invest in the establishment of really important platforms, projects, and capacity building opportunities that enable us as a community to seek expertise from those who really understand what they're doing in given areas, to develop collaborative relationships, to start new projects, and to really drive the forthcoming agenda of the Centre over the next 5 years. We've held the first dispersal of some of Jennie's funding, and one of the first recipients was the Wearables Hub. It's being launched today, and it's to be led by these two young men sitting here at the front. One of them, Professor Emmanuel Stamatakis, is going to begin with his opening remarks in a moment, and Matthew Ahmadi beside him is the early career researcher who is co-leading the Wearables Hub, which is entirely in the spirit of Jennie's gift. We need to really give opportunities to and engage our early and mid-career researchers right at the forefront of the work that we're doing. So the Hub is going to provide a consultation and collaboration platform for researchers, not only members of the Charles Perkins Centre, but more broadly across the university. And it's going to help people to design, implement, and disseminate high-quality research using wearable devices. And as part of that, and as a product of that, there's going to be capacity building, training, and generally the promulgation of the use of wearables in research. It's a really fantastic opportunity. And Manos and Matthew and Margaret, our other speaker today, Margaret Allman-Farinelli, are some of the most skilled practitioners in the use of wearables, and that's really what we're here to do today. So with that, let me introduce Manos. I could go on, but I won't at great length. He can't peel chestnuts safely, but it's the first thing we know. And elaborate on that point. And he's also lost his voice a couple of weeks ago and is only now able to speak. So we need to bear in mind that Manos's dulcet tones may be a little croakier than usual. Manos got his PhD from the University of Bristol in 2003. He undertook a postdoc in epidemiology at University College London, where he led the development of large health surveillance studies and lifestyle risk factor epidemiological consortia. So that really started to set the scene for his career. He's had since then over 20 years of wearables-based research leadership, including leading the development of the first European health surveillance study that used accelerometers, and that was the Health Survey for England in 2008. And he formally joined Charles Perkins Centre in 2014. We're lucky enough in that early period of recruitment of rising stars and senior leaders from across the world to come to the then nascent centre. We were lucky enough to get Manos to come. Originally, I think it was through what was then the Faculty of Health Sciences. And then he popped over to the School of Public Health, Jaime, and then he was recruited back into health sciences. But throughout, he's been at Charles Perkins Centre. One of his most, I think, really significant achievements in recent years has been establishing what's called the PROPAS Consortium, which was initiated in 2018 with support from Charles Perkins Centre. And that's the Prospective Physical Activity Sitting and Sleep Consortium, which is an international consortium which is having great impact in the field of physical activity. He's also, over the last couple of years, you've probably read, at least seen the media coverage of his work with Matthew, particularly in reanalyzing the UK Biobank data and taking really fine-grained look at physical activity data generated by wearable devices and starting to really titrate what types and durations of physical activity yield the best health outcomes in these prospective cohorts. And the UK Biobank is the biggest of those. And you'll hear more about that over coming months as well. So he's got over 370 publications, been cited tens of thousands of times. He's one of the high-cite researchers here at Charles Perkins Centre, the Claravet highly cited researchers. And he's editor of many of the key journals in the field. And I think I'm starting to lose my own voice now, so at that, I think I'll hand over to you. Welcome to Manos.
For making the time to join us today. I really feel obliged to finish this chestnut story before I start. Because it's a fun story. I think it would be a nice story topper for your weekend, perhaps. So the reason why the first event was cancelled back in August was I got a chest infection from peeling off roasted chestnuts. So be careful next time you have to do it. It's a dangerous activity. There should be a health warning at the street. So I'd like to somehow flip the order of my talk, and I will start by giving you a little bit of general context about wearables. Try to answer the very simple question: what are we talking about when we refer to wearables? I think there is quite a bit of the term is used in a quite vague term, an ambiguous term, and then I will show some highlights from the research that Steve outlined, some part of wearables-based, some highlights from our wearables-based research, and I will conclude with a description. The most exciting part of my talk, perhaps, will be the description of the functions of the Mackenzie Wearables Research Hub. Now, wearables, there's nothing new about wearables. They have been around for some 50, 60 years. Of course, over time, they shrunk a lot in size. Those of you who work in the field of cardiology, cardiac nurses, you may be able to recognize the gentleman on the left. This is Jeff Holter. Perhaps it's ringing a bell. Holter monitors, ECG monitors, portable monitors. This is the very first version of it. Of course, over time, they shrunk a lot. They're about that big now. And I have no doubt that you've been exposed to the second very early stage wearable on the right-hand side. This is the Mampo K, the 10,000 steps meter, marketed by the company called Yamasa around the Olympics, the Tokyo Olympics in 1964. And there you go, the 10,000 steps meter target was born. The media seem to be obsessed. There's a new article about this. I don't know why it has attracted so much media and so much public attention. The message is still around, so this is where it comes from the Mampo K meter, the very first mechanical analog pedometer. It's very important when we talk about wearables to be a bit more specific, especially when we talk about the applications of wearables in research and the value and the potential of wearables in research, the huge potential they have. So I would like to provide you a couple of different typologies, just to get your thinking, to frame your thinking around the potential around wearables and how they can be used in research. So first of all, on the left-hand side here, you can see research-grade wearables. I have quite a few of those. I'm wearing one of those. It has a screen. No matter what I do, it doesn't do anything to me. It doesn't show anything. There's one light flashing on it. That's it. Sometimes I don't even know why it's flashing. This is a research-grade wearable designed to do specifically for research. It's a very robust device like this activity. For example, the Actipal. They're all very dull-looking, very robust and ruggedized devices to tolerate and endure the hard use in the field by participants, but they're very basic at the same time. As of 2023, the average research-grade wearable has a single accelerometric sensor. This is it. So this is technology. I'm talking about technology of 2007. And the reasons are quite some of the reasons why research-grade wearables aren't that technologically advanced, especially when we compare them to consumer-grade wearables. And there's a huge chasm, there's a huge gap here. Consumer-grade wearables, they come in all sorts of shapes and forms, rings. Can you believe that this tiny, tiny ring has a PPG sensor, temperature sensor, an accelerometer, a battery, memory storage, in this packaging, in this tiny, tiny packaging. Many other devices picked it up. Watches, the offering when it comes to consumer-grade wearables, it's immense. There is huge competitions. The industry, the wearables, the consumer wearables industry, they are not restricted by the research cycle. Ethics, funding, academics arguing what is the best way forward and never agreeing on anything. So there's a lot more agility, a lot more flexibility. So it's not surprising that this chasm exists in terms of technological capacity, but I see our role as Mackenzie Wearables Research Hub critical in helping advancing the hardware aspects of things. I will elaborate more on this when I talk about the functions of the hub. So the second typology of the applications design, what do we use wearables for in general? I'm not talking about research specifically. What are wearables used for? Diagnostic purposes, monitoring of vital signs such as blood pressure, heart rate, temperature, breathing rates, respiratory rates, all these things. Clinical applications, so these applications are clinical. And when it comes to wearables, clinical use of wearables comes with a demand for medical certification, with medical grade certification. Now, for us who do non-clinical research, that's a blessing, but it's more of a curse, actually. Medical grade certification is a curse. Why? Yes, you have a medical certification, there is some basic assessment of the accuracy of the device, safety of the device, that's safe anyway. But the price, usually, it pushes the prices to a level to an astronomical level, which is not makes it prohibitively expensive for using large-scale research. Remember, we're doing research in 5s of thousands, 10s of thousands, hundreds. We're starting our projects in France. Potentially, we will recruit hundreds of thousands of people. So the price point for a research wearable is critical. And it could be linked, go back to why they're still so basic, because manufacturers are still trying to suppress the cost of the production. Third application now, these are software applications of wearables in the sense that they don't require medical certification. Motivational tools, so the rings, the wristbands, the smartwatches, all these things, they motivate you to live a healthier lifestyle, be more active, sleep better, sit less, and all these things. And last but not the least, and that's the most important function, application of wearables for us, researchers, mostly epidemiology, large-scale research, is the devices that are simply used to observe. That's why they're so dull, boring looking. We don't have screens, we don't have buttons, because we don't want people to fiddle with them. We don't want them to fiddle with them. We don't want them to get any feedback back, because that will alter behavior. It's not observation of the behavior anymore. It's altered behavior. So with that in mind, I would like now to give you a couple of examples from our research program. This is the research program based mostly in the UK, Baba. We have lots of activity, we have lots of studies. I could go on and on and on, but I restrain myself to give you examples from 2 studies only. And these 2 studies will give you an idea, a flavor of in how much depth we can go when it comes to scrutinizing and examining the health attributes of our behavior. Steve already touched on that. What we call micro patterns, how wearables help us dissect human behavior to the point that we're looking with a microscope, literally with a magnifying glass or a microscope, our own behavior and how that affects health. The last point about the typology I want to make is that consumer-created devices now, they start, these 4 applications are not mutually exclusive. One device can do it almost all. We have here examples from Fitbit and Apple Watch that have some form of medical grading certification, and they can do diagnostic applications as well, or at least the first flags of the disease. So moving now to the UK government, the micro-patterns part of our program. We have coined a concept called VILPA, vigorous intermittent lifestyle physical activity. This is about incidental physical activity. It's those things you are doing on your day-to-day routine. I'm not talking about exercise. I'm not talking about swimming in the swimming pool or going to the gym or running. Incidental physical activity. And the reason why we have chosen to focus on that aspect of physical activity is that it corresponds to 97% of our daily movement. So if you take all exercise done in the population out there, all sports, all exercise, that's 3% of total movement. The second reason why I see it as an imperative to try and understand in much depth what is the potential of day-to-day, routine day-to-day movement is that, again, in other statistics, 20% of the population are doing sports and exercise at any given time. And this has been the same for the last 40 years, I've seen data. It's not changing, there's a ceiling. 15 to 20% of the adult population will be exercisers. What do we do with the remaining 80%? These are the 80%, and it happens to be the 80% that have the largest needs in terms of disease prevention and understanding how we can use daily movement to prevent disease and promote their health. So, VILPA. First paper, this is the very first paper published in the literature by us on the health effects of VILPA. And what we found is really, really striking. An amount of physical activity equivalent of approximately 3 to 4 minutes of incidental movement done at a higher intensity involving huffing and puffing, as detected by wrist wearable devices, 3 to 4 minutes from 3 bouts was associated with 50% reduction in cardiovascular mortality risk and around 40% reduction in all-cause mortality risk, around 30% reduction in cancer mortality risk. For those of you who have read epidemiology of physical activity or lifestyle, nutrition epidemiology as well, these are striking, these are very, very large effect sizes. And what's interesting is that we could detect these effects because we used wearables. All the previous literature, 90% of what we know about lifestyle and health, 90-95% comes from questionnaires. All that very vast amount of literature accrued in the last 30 to 40 years could not detect these patterns at all because there was no technological capacity. Questionnaires cannot measure incidental activity. Questionnaires cannot measure short bouts. They are very, very limited. So a second example, and this time it's an unpublished study, a study that should be published in the next few weeks, I believe, late September, early October. This is Matthew's new study. Here we've started dissecting, literally dissecting the minute-by-minute physical activity pattern, trying to understand something quite simple in a way, but quite complex in another way. So let's say that in this group, everyone is doing, let's hypothesize that everyone is doing 10 minutes of physical activity on average. You are doing 10 minutes of physical activity a day on average, and you are doing it through 5 bouts, 5 sessions of 2 minutes long each, yeah? This side of the room. You are doing 10 minutes, but you are doing 20 bouts, 20 sessions, 30 seconds each. Who will get most benefit? This is the kind of question we are trying to understand with the wearables in the UK Biobank. What headline findings? I'm not going to talk about the graph. It's a little bit complicated and hard to get your head around. It was a very complex study. It took us 7 drafts before we shared it with co-authors. It took us 7 submissions before we got accepted. It took an appeal against the decision to have it to be invited for a revision, and eventually we had accepted by class of publication, and eventually got accepted in early August. So headline findings: the answer to the question I've just posed. So you need to be moving at least more continuously for at least 1 to 3 minutes to get most of the benefit. So if you're on this side of the room, well, there is still hope for you, because we did some further calculations, we did another analysis, and we tried to understand within the 1 minute up to 1 minute, the short, very short bouts, what if they contain a certain percentage of vigorous intense activity? So from the previous study, we know, and from previous literature, we know how potent vigorous intense activity is. Could it be that there is a threshold of vigorous activity within this very short bouts you're doing that gives you some hope, at least, to improve your cardiac health? Yes, there is hope, because we found that at least if very short bouts under 1 minute long, if at least 15% of that is vigorous activity, kind of activity that makes you huff and puff, you're in business. Fine, no problem. Okay, so this is just examples. We have lots of work on this concept of micro patterns. Important to highlight, I've already said that, I'll repeat it once more. This is type of activity that is fallen under the radar of previous studies, and especially from the very large physical activity literature that has informed guidelines, clinical recommendations. It's the same body of evidence that informs this. This was under the radar. This didn't exist. So proof and testament to the potential, to the huge potential of wearables, if we use the signal in the right way. And that brings me to the description of the hub, the Mackenzie Wearables Hub. We're extremely grateful to CPC for trusting us. Of course, we're extremely grateful to Jennie Mackenzie for trusting CPC with this bequest. And I reassure you that we will make use. We have some very, very exciting plans. What I would like to share with you is the basic functions of the hub. First of all, we are setting up we have set it up, and we have invested most of our energy in the first 6 months of its existence as an enabling platform. And I will give you a lot more detail about this. Algorithmic development, for the reasons I've already implied or mentioned, it is very important to give meaning to the wearable's signal. All this is very unstandardized out there. This is a very critical function of ours. It's a very unsexy type of research because no one wants to fund it. That's a problem. So we have to do it essentially in our free time. Perhaps we will utilize another reason why the hub is giving us this flexibility. We utilize some resources and progress on the algorithm development, take our program to the next level. The hub will be a collaborative hub for people to come together. There is no such an entity, dedicated, wearables-focused research entity. I'm not aware of any such enterprise in Australia or elsewhere around the world. And finally, hardware co-development. Going back to the reasons why I explained why we need to step up our game when it comes to hardware. We cannot be doing research only in 2023. We cannot be doing research with a single accelerometer anymore. And of course, that will take very close collaboration with industry. So the enabling platform aspect of the hub. The intention here was that we develop a one-stop shop for any researcher out there, any research team who need some support with any project that has something to do with wearables. So it's very open. It's very, very open. So we don't assume any previous experience. We don't assume any level of expertise. We can provide support across the whole cycle, right from the very beginning, conceptualization of the research question, all the way to designing together the research project. In some cases, we'll be able to offer equipment thanks to the generous support by the request support. We have purchased a stock of devices to support our local community at least, the University of Sydney community with devices, if the research groups don't have funding already, but we can support ethics applications, grant applications, all the way to collecting the data, processing and cleaning the data, very demanding processes, analyze the data, and something that no one usually thinks about when you collect the data, how to make the most of the data, how to make the most of the wearables data, this vast amounts of data. You will be surprised how much data are sitting around or with no use. Samantha, is that a warning? Time warning? Or I should okay, thank you. Yeah, so if you have any needs, any questions, any things that are clear about, and you think that we can support you, we'll be very happy to hear from you. The idea is that the service is, we're already started piloting the service. The idea is that we fine-tune it to a good level within the University of Sydney. Our effort and our intention is to do it for free to our University of Sydney colleagues. But once we bring it to a certain level, we will roll it out outside the university as a pay for free service. I estimate we are maybe 6 to 9 months away from that. Of course, we don't, I'm not saying that we won't be offering the whole cycle of support. It could be that certain projects will need certain different, we'll have different needs, we'll have lower needs, we'll need support with a certain part of the research process. We're prepared for all that. We have different levels of service so that we can customize, we can tailor the service to the needs of the individual researcher, or more often than researcher, it would be the needs of the individual group, research group. So the second aspect of our second function of the hub, this is an already existing function. We've been doing this kind of studies for quite a while, trying to develop, increasingly use ML, machine learning, but not only, trying to give some meaning, to those vast amounts of signal collected by wearables. And what I mean by that is that how we take the signal and based on certain properties of the signal, we categorize this into tangible human behavior or tangible human physiology, heart rate, for example, or a combination of the two. Sometimes we use the physiological markers or even geographical markers to understand better the behavior from the wearable. For example, heart rate can help us understand the intensity of physical activity, the altitude. Barometric pressure sensors are extremely useful for us because they can help us understand whether walking was done on a flat surface or whether it was gradient, because the intensity multiplies when you walk on a gradient or you do stair climbing. So a lot of activity on that front. Well, several studies in progress, several studies we have planned. We have collaborators from Oxford, from UK, from Germany, Austria. We have quite a few. We're building a collaborative network on that. But it is a kind of research that it is difficult because of the funding issue. There are very few initiatives. I mean, think of what NHMRC grants would fund methodology development. Very few. There is a very, very small list. And methodology, I'd just like to give you another very tangible example. Why it's so critical when it comes to wearables, not simply to take the product from the manufacturers, from the box, and say, I'm going to use the software that the manufacturer is giving me. You really need to be thinking how to maximize the potential, the use of the device and the data, the immense amounts of data the device gives me. So we have introduced the literature what we call a two-stage intensity classifier. So this was partly taken from previous work, partly masterminded by Matthew and his amazing expertise with machine learning. The end product is a very unique intensity classifier, which what we did is in a way quite simple. We first used machine learning to understand the broad type of activity from the signal, and at a later stage, within type, we classified the intensity. We estimated the physiological intensity, which is, as I showed you already, it's critical for the health effects of physical activity. So quite simply in a way. And of course, once you do it this way, you end up with a more accurate intensity classification because it's very specific to the activity. So the academic, in terms of the payoff this investment in this classifier, for example, it was fantastic. Within 1 year, we published all these papers. We have more papers in the pipeline, and indicative how much thirst there is out there, how much desire there is out there from the general public, from editors of journals. Indicative is we had these papers published in less than 12 months. They've been downloaded 450, close to 500,000 times. These are technical reports, so that's a very decent number. And for lay media articles, this is not much, but for research, this is substantial. They have attracted about 1,600 of media, online media stories alone, as well as a lot of TV, radio. So there is a lot of desire. Wearables can do a lot of things if we actively push the envelope. And I'm very excited about Margaret's talk in particular, because she'll be talking about an extremely exciting application of wearables. I'll close my talk with just like one note about the hardware development. This is not something that certainly we invest energy and time, but we cannot do it on our own. We're very fortunate to have some very good to have initiated discussions. I'm very thankful to George and Tim from Genesis in particular, who at some point I thought that they stole my idea, but then at the same time I thought, wait a second, I've been doing business for years, and I had an idea a couple of weeks ago, literally, about a modular sensor. And then I spoke to them and they say, we're doing modular sensors. And I go, no, I thought they would become rich and famous with that. So let's become rich and famous together, George and Tim. But partnerships with industry, not only, we have a partnership with Fitbit as well, in progress, CPC level partnership. Partnerships with industry are critical. It's something that the Mackenzie Hub will invest a lot of energy, because together we can make a difference. We will be much harder without the support and partnership of industry to maximize the potential, to reach the full potential. Very last note, my amazing team. Thank you all for putting up with me the last few months. Sometimes my patience reserves are not what I would like them to be, especially during this last month that I've been attacked by infections on the nail fingers, I've been attacked by germs in my voice. Yeah, thank you very much, and I feel really privileged to have you working with you on this, and I'm very positive, especially the Mackenzie Hub happening in this amazing institute, Charles Perkins Centre, that we can together achieve really great things, and hopefully help on the way, help our university to climb up a couple of places in the international rankings. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Manos. That was wonderful. Going from activities and human behaviors that we have really good technologies for measuring, activity, sleep, to probably the most, and I would say this, and Margaret would agree with me, the really important thing that we do is eat. That's probably the least well, or second least well, measured aspect of human behavior. Our next speaker is Professor Margaret Allman-Farinelli, and Margaret is Professor of Nutrition and Dietetics here at the University of Sydney. I didn't realize you were 4 times graduate of the University of Sydney. That's a remarkable achievement in its own right. Margaret has been on our journey at Charles Perkins Centre right from the beginning and before that. And I think you've moved from what was then the biochemistry department, as was School of Life and Environmental Sciences, and now to the School of Nursing, throughout being a really crucial part of the Charles Perkins Centre, bringing in dietetics into our nutrition theme, and having a leadership role, particularly in the development of the measurements of food intake, nutritional intake, not only here, but nationally as well. So Margaret's one of the leaders in the decadal plan for nutrition science, which is being delivered through the Australian Academy of Science. And she's not only on the original planning team for that, but on the implementation team as well. So we have many projects that she leads, including colleagues over in the University of San Diego and various other places as well. So Margaret, you can start talking about something that really matters.
Thank you. Really says it all, because we're going to have to learn how to measure what's not measurable. Okay, so we're talking about diary assessment, and I'm pleased to offer you these innovations. What we've done is we've digitalised the methods that we invented in the first half of the last century. So perhaps that's a little disappointing, and you might be using these. You might know about a food frequency questionnaire. We present people with a list of foods. We ask how frequently they eat them. We ask about the serving size. That's all we know, what they eat, how often. You might have people recording in a food diary on their app. So they will record what they eat. You might get what they eat. It may or may not be a true representation. And we've found that people don't record it prospectively, even though they're asked to. So we don't know anything really about the time when they're eating what. The 24-hour recall asks the person to recall the time and everything they ate in the previous 24 hours. So we might get some information about the when. This is one word.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
Yep.
We can
Put that there. Sorry. Yeah, okay.
You don't need to point it anywhere, it just works.
Okay, so why might I want to know when someone eats? Well, for many, many reasons, but one of the most popular now is the concept of time-restricted eating, where it's proposed it's not what you eat, but when you eat. So if we're able to objectively measure when people are eating, that would be a good thing to be able to do. I got it now. Okay, so we're talking about an objective measure of eating time instead of self-report. Now, wearables do allow this. Here we have Nabil Al-Shurafa, and he's got a very nice looking necklace there, which can actually detect all food and beverage. So we know the timing of consumption. What we're really interested in working on with Matthew is accelerometer traces. So about 10 years ago, a group in the States worked out that they could detect periods of eating during free living, and we're hoping we're going to be able to do that. So we've got some ways of finding what and when, but we also want to know how people eat, why they eat, where they eat, who they're eating with. So we think that wearables are actually a good way of trying to collect this information. We have in the past used wearable cameras to achieve this. Perhaps a better version would be these wearable glasses with sensors that detect eating, can take a photo of what's being eaten, etc. Using the accelerometer, if we were able to actually detect eating, a signal could go back and we could send the person a prompt to complete information about what they're eating, where they're eating, or to take a photo of what they're eating. So if we can use wearables, we can get more objective and better and fine-grained information about how people are eating. It's not blue sky. Here's an example of a protocol that's going on in America, one of many, where you can see here they're using 3 different wearables, the necklace, camera, and wrist, and also utilising the ecological momentary assessment. So here and now with sensors, imaging and AI, it's time to advance the measurement of diet. I hope we can do it and add something with the Wearables Hub. But I do stress it's multidisciplinary work, so if we have any engineers or IT people interested in progressing this, we'd love to work with you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Margaret. And that brings us to our final speaker, who's you've heard about a lot right from the beginning, and that's Matthew Ahmadi. Dr. Ahmadi is a research fellow at the University of Sydney in the Faculty of Medicine and Health here at the Charles Perkins Centre. He's a member of the editorial board of the journal for the measurement of physical behaviour, the Journal of Physical Activity and Health, working in the ProPass consortium with Manos. And as you've heard, he's a lead researcher in much of the very exciting work that's come out of the last couple of years, and he's co-director of the Mackenzie Wearables Hub. So, Matthew, over to you for the final words.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you everyone for being here today. Wearables are all around us, largely have been ingrained in our day-to-day lives. Over the past 5 years, we've seen a 2-digit year-over-year increase in the wearables market, with projections estimating this to exceed $430 billion by the year 2026. But to understand where we are and where we're going, we first need to understand where we started. Wearables have been used in research for more than 25 years now, but we really first started seeing them being used in health-based population research around 2000 to 2010. During this time, due to the relatively high cost of these devices and the unfamiliarity researchers had with their potential, we saw a modest uptake in them in studies, with our average cohort size being around 6,000 participants, our largest being around 9,000 in the NHANE study over in the US. And then our largest pooled wearables data set with around 45,000 participants, comprising 8 different cohorts across 4 countries. Now, as Manos touched on earlier, there's usually a 10 to 15 year gap in research before these studies come to fruition and the potential is realized. This is due largely to improvements and advancements in methodologies, but also because it takes time for these cohorts to age and mature and events to accumulate. And wearable-based cohorts are no different from this. True to this timeline, it's around 2015 to 2020 that researchers begin to understand the impact wearables may have in changing the research landscape. And this can be seen through editorials, commentaries, and expert consensus outlining how we can harmonize wearables in different devices, understanding the different health effects that can be discerned from wearables, and then finally asking and answering the question, are wearables ready for prime time? Moving on now to the next decade in 2011, we see the cost of these devices start to go down a little bit due to improvements in the efficiency of their manufacturing. And as researchers become more familiar with them, we see much wider uptake on a larger scale. Our average cohort size is now around 25 to 30,000 participants, with the largest being the UK Biobank, having over 100,000 participants with wearables data. Our largest pooled international consortium is now over 100,000 participants from ProPass, representing 14 different countries. And then in 2023, important steps were taken by the research community to consolidate their thoughts and ideas on how wearables can be used to inform the next iteration of our guidelines coming out national and international around 2030, and how this can be used to inform and change our prevention and treatment strategies. This can be most clearly seen in a series of commissioned editorials published last month in the British Journal of Sports Medicine, co-led by the Wearables Hub, where researchers outlined how wearables are currently being used and how they can be used in the coming years to change our landscape. With all these advancements we have in health-based research using wearables, it's only made possible because of the improvements in the device hardware. To briefly give you an idea of this, I'm going to touch on the device batteries and the changes we've seen in those the past few years alone. One of the limitations with wearable devices is the battery life cycle and how quickly they can be drained the more they are used, the more sensors they're required to power. However, pretty soon, this limitation may no longer be an issue, as we're in the process in the community of developing and producing batteries that can last several hundred years and up to 100,000 cycles. In parallel to this, improvements in polymer science have also taken batteries from being solid compartment to now being flexible, bendable, and stretchable, just like an elastic. And what's really nice is that these two different fields of engineering are both pushing each other forward. And as these two fields are advancing, a byproduct is they're also going to push forward the health research sector, creating a very nice harmonious relationship between health sciences and engineering. today's wearables, it's very common to see multiple sensors being housed inside a single unit. However, in the research field, we typically only leverage 1 to 3 of these devices to give us information. And that's typically because the health sector will typically lag a little behind the technology side, but it always does catch up. And a great example of this can be seen the BioBeat device on the far right of the screen. That is now the first device to be FDA and TGA approved for cupless blood pressure monitoring. There's a few other devices currently going under FDA and TGA approval for their devices and their individual sensors. And as these become approved, researchers will use them more frequently, more widely, that will allow us to start using sensor fusion approaches that will give us more in-depth information to improve our treatment and prevention strategies. With wearables, we typically see them in this kind of unit or compartment. However, going back to the improvements I was talking about in polymer science, pretty soon they're going to be able to be put right on our skin like a band-aid. We can become so miniature they can be implanted within us. And those methods will give us new forms of avenues for biometric data that will complement the physiological and movement data we already get, that will combine help us give more deeper meaning to that signal. Around 15 years ago, we saw a really significant change in our day-to-day lives and how we had home computers, big bulky units, so several different compartments get shrunken down into our phones while still maintaining that same capacity. And right now, I believe we're on the precipice of something very similar. We're in diagnostic and monitoring. We use many different tools and modalities, but very soon these will be shrunken down and housed inside our single wearable unit. And the really nice part about all this is that they'll already be able to do what our phones do: answer and receive calls, send and receive text messages. In closing, I thank you all for your time, and I think we'll move on to
Thank you. Thank you, Matthew. Look, several things have struck me by listening today. One of them is what a wonderful Charles Perkins Centre opportunity this is. This is bringing together the whole of the university. We need our engineers, we need our physical scientists, mathematicians, we need our biologists, our medical scientists and health scientists, but also those in the humanities and the social sciences. It sits at the nexus of so much of what we do. The other thing I really liked about this is that when you start to get to the level of detail that Margaret and Matthew and Manos have been talking about, you have a direct route into the underlying biology, the mechanisms of action and processes on health, but you also have a really clear direct translational pipeline into public health and policy. So that's kind of why we've invested in this project through the Mackenzie Hub. It has the set of characteristics that we thought really typified where we wanted to put the investment made possible to Jennie. And having Matthew and the early career researchers intimately part of this process, including in its leadership, is really crucial. So look, with that, thank you to everybody, and we'll open the floor to questions.
Let's just start the question from Emmanuel. I think you answered it.
And Margaret,
I think you answered it. I did write down a question, and I think you might have answered it, but you said initially it's just available to Sydney University researchers. So somebody has to be, do they have to be connected with a Sydney University researcher in order to take advantage of the hub? Or can it be, in the use case I'm thinking of, is the customers, we get a lot of customers of Genesis who come to us with an innovation. Quite often they're a surgeon or a PhD student from anywhere around the world, and they just go, yeah, we want to make this thing, but they also need to have it validated, typically through clinical trials. Is that something that somebody could come to you and say?
Some of them.
Yeah.
The current plan is that, so this is the very first phase of the enabling platform. That's what I refer to in, so that I estimate that we will be ready to offer external services in 3 months, 6 months. But all these things take time. So we will be happy to talk to anyone at this point in time.
So if they're already working with another university,
No problem.
Yeah.
No problem.
And the other, just to pick up on two things, the fact, as Manos said, that it gives the bridge to work directly with industry is fantastic, and that set of excellent partnerships. And the other thing that we have the capacity to do is to link from here through to clinical trials. And one of the other big investments that we've made through Mackenzie is in the clinic, which we have the Royal Prince Alfred Charles Perkins Centre clinic here in this building. And that's being established in a rather similar way to connect and to deliver clinical trials, clinical care, clinical and public outreach in lifestyle. So it's joined up, and we can start with a question that comes through an industry, bring it to the hub, pass it ultimately through to the clinical team, and it's really going to start to oil the wheels of the Charles Perkins Centre together. But no, great question. At the back.
I'd like to bounce on Tim's question and what you just explained, and also on the big flow chart that the professor showed, including the ethics application.
Right.
And you know, this space of wearable is definitely at the boundary between clinical research and wellness, and the regulated technology and the unregulated technology. And my question is, did you make a conscious choice to only address the clinical side, or are you open to support wellness research without ethics application?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the question is.
Like, if the ultimate application of the wearable defines it as a medical device, then you need clinical evidence. Then, to obtain this clinical evidence, you need to conduct clinical research. You need an ethical approval. If your end product is not regulated as a medical device, you are a wellness product, you can't go to market without clinical evidence, but you may still want to have scientific evidence to prove that you are a solid device.
The medical certification, so once the device is used for clinical purposes in a clinical population, and the TGA has specific definitions around this, and they don't consider clinical application, for example, the motivational aspect of the trackers, of these smartwatches. If it's clinical population and clinical application, for example, blood pressure monitoring of an at-risk population, of a patient population, that requires medical certification, medical grade certification by TGA. It's not us who make the decision. We can support essentially, because the kind of support we provide is agnostic to the medical certification. With the thoughts I share with you around the difficulties that sometimes medical certifications create for us, price tag. The price tag, I was looking from the standpoint of the individual researcher, let's say, not, I wasn't referring to how we will interact with clinical researchers who need to use medical grade devices through the hub.
But certainly the translation of the evidence as accrued through the hub into population behaviour, that's the well-being, motivation, incentivization, education piece. That doesn't require anything other than that the evidence is well-founded and scientifically rigorous.
In epidemiology, we can get away with doing research in clinical populations using unregulated devices, because essentially we utilize population level samples. They contain a mixture of people with diseases with healthy people. So very often we do it physically. In the last few years, we focus on clinical populations, because there are differences in characteristics in the responses to different aspects of lifestyle, as well as the mobility capacity, capabilities.
Hi, thanks very much. Super interesting outside my field. But Margaret, if I can ask you, when it comes to Because obviously self-reported what people eat is generally very bad. Where are we at? Where would you say the technology is at if you wanted to use this right now to really assess like compliance in, say, a dietary intervention program?
What would I say? I'd say it's limited in Australia. However, we do have means of validating the information that we collect from our old methods. So, for example, you might do doubly labeled water or a biomarker or something like that to validate the existing methods. I think that with a concerted effort, we could get further. We're really interested in looking at the eating time now and seeing if we can get the accelerometer traces working so we detect when people are eating, which would be a good thing. If we can do that, then maybe we can get bite-sized chunks of information from people about what they eat. Doing it that way, it's less likely to have the bias or forgetfulness that they have when they have to remember a day later. So the methods for sampling people are there. There's platforms for doing that. We just have to link them up, I think. And there are a number of groups in the States who are doing that already.
The cameras that you mentioned?
The cameras, we've used the cameras. There are growing ethical concerns about cameras. So we've been able to do it. What we actually need, I think, is someone who can take the images and remove all of the people's faces from the images before we would analyze. So I think that's possible, would be a way around having problems.
There's software that does it. But I think it's very ethical, it's specific because of this cameras, 3 projects, 2 or 3 projects. I think we have got that kind of approval, never gave us any hassle, other than the last study, they asked us to obtain consent from the rest of the household because their faces would appear on the recordings.
But it was informative enough just having the visual of the food eating. I mean,
what we get, from the visuals of what people are eating, the better the camera angle, the better the image. But you can definitely see people coming up to an eating episode, taking food out of the refrigerator, preparing the food. So you can get the seconds when they're eating. So it's all quite fine-grained data. However, if the camera and these glasses you're seeing, if it's correct, you can easily see what the food is, and you have to work out the composition of the food. But if the angle, like the family wearable cameras, sometimes it might be obscure what's in the bowl that they're going to eat. But these things, I think with refinements are all possible.
Now, I'm mindful of time. One quick last question. Yes.
We know that there are many wearables that are being used, both medical and consumable grade. Have you identified a wearable that you can recommend to us and recommend it for use in through the hub?
That's the function of the Mackenzie Wearables Research Hub. So advise you, but that's a long discussion because it depends on what your needs are, what are your research questions, your population. It's not a question that can be answered without knowing having a bit of background about the future.
Can I ask a second question?
Yes.
There was a lady there who's been I'm not being raising her hand for quite a while.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you, Manos. I was wondering how you're going to prioritize the level of support, and also what wearables do you have in-house already, like potentially available to use?
That's the question. Okay, no, that's really, I'm really glad I answered this question because we have quite a few requests of people to lend them equipment. We are not an equipment loan service. We want to support as much, so our top of priorities is projects to come to us that they want support for the full cycle, and then we will certainly prioritize them if we get too busy. We will prioritize projects that have potential to bring in funding, minus fixed, sorry, but potentially to bring in funding or have funded projects somehow, support grant applications. But our intention essentially is to support each and every person who comes through our door, and we would like to support everyone who needs equipment on it, but it's unrealistic. but we're a team of 5 or 6 people. So I think and I hope that there will be a lot of demand for the service. Yeah, we have already set guiding principles about the prioritization for this. What was the second question?
Yeah, no, they're the two questions, yeah.
I think 2 seconds. Yeah, very last question. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
well, then I'll actually hand over to my colleague here who's got a more important suggestion or question.
On the dietitian side of things, which really intrigued me, interested me. You mentioned using cameras to take pictures, but did you consider maybe that instead of taking pictures to get rid of the whole ethical side of things, that you just use Edge AI for computer vision for detection of the food, never take photos, just say what's there, what's being eaten.
So are you saying, have they considered speaking through what's there?
No, it's computer vision.
Who would like to learn more?
Using Edge AI to detect and provide text form, say, of what's actually in front. Never having to take photos, but getting a way of getting feedback of what's actually being eaten without
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm thinking wearables.
Follow that line. That sounds a great way to end. So look, everybody, thank you. The one thing we didn't talk about today was sleep. We do have a sleep theme here, and Peter Sistuli and Philip Di Shazala are the co-leads on that. And I only mention that not only because it's a crucial part of the wearable hub, but also that the CPAP technology was invented at the University of Sydney by Colin Sullivan, engineer. And he is a supporter of the work that happens here in sleep. In sleep, physical activity and nutrition and diet are the 3 pillars around which so much happens in our health. And another real aim for us is to put those 3 together. Start with exploring in detail physical activity, diet, and sleep. How do they interact? How do they, in combination, yield different health outcomes? So that's another frontier of work that we're working on here. So look, with that, I'd like to thank our speakers and to thank Jennie Mackenzie for her gift and for the support. And I'd like to thank you all for coming and welcome to the Wearables Hub. Thanks very much. Our next Charles Perkins Centre talks is on the 10th of October, and that's going to be on Children Are Our Future, talking sleep and modelling in childhood obesity and overweight. And that will be chaired by Professor Louise Bow. So I look forward to seeing you all there. Thanks very much.
Yes.